My name is Evelyn Mercer. I was 34 years old when I discovered my mother had spent almost a year trying to replace the man I loved. I found out 5 days before my wedding. Not because she confessed. Because someone sent a message to the wrong group chat. By then, the invitations had already been mailed. The seating chart was finalized. My wedding dress was hanging inside the bridal suite at Blackstone Gardens, zipped carefully into a white garment bag that still smelled faintly like steamed satin and lavender. And somewhere in the middle of all that planning, my mother had accepted $50,000 from another family who believed I was supposed to marry their son instead. She never told my father. She never told me. But she did prepare a speech for him to read at the altar. And she reserved a seat in the third row for the man she thought I should marry. The morning of the ceremony, my maid of honor closed the bridal suite door, locked it behind her, and looked at me with a face so pale it made my stomach tighten before she even spoke. "Evelyn," she said quietly, "don't walk out there until you see this." At first, I thought she meant nerves. Cold feet, some wedding day disaster involving flowers or catering or weather. I had no idea my entire family was about to ambush me in front of 200 guests with cameras already recording. What they wanted was humiliation. What they got instead was exposure. Welcome to Dark Decisions channel. If you love emotional stories about family, betrayal, second chances, and life-changing decisions, make sure to subscribe and leave a like on the video. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the hardest moments become the ones that change everything. And trust me, this story is only getting started. I grew up in a large brick colonial house outside Charlotte, North Carolina, in a neighborhood where every lawn looked professionally trimmed and every mailbox matched the one beside it. My mother cared deeply about appearances. Not wealth exactly, appearances. There's a difference. Real wealth is quiet. My mother preferred performance. She hosted wine nights she couldn't afford. She bought decorative towels nobody was allowed to touch. She rearranged furniture before guests arrived, as if the position of a couch determined whether our family looked successful. Her name is Lorraine Mercer. If charm could be weaponized, my mother would have carried it like a concealed firearm. People loved her. Church women loved her. Neighbors loved her. Real estate agents loved her. Waiters loved her. Because Lorraine knew how to make people feel chosen. Until they disappointed her. Then the warmth disappeared so fast it felt like standing too close to a heater that suddenly shut off in winter. My father, Walter Mercer, spent 32 years as a regional insurance adjuster. Quiet man. Predictable man. He wore the same silver watch every day for almost 20 years and believed most arguments could be avoided by saying nothing long enough. That strategy worked beautifully for everyone except his daughters. I have one younger sister, Brielle Mercer, 28 years old. Brielle was the celebrated one. That dynamic settled into our house early. By 13, I cooked dinner twice a week because my mother was overwhelmed. By 15, I handled grocery lists, pharmacy pickups, and most holiday preparations. By 17, I knew how to calm my mother down before guests arrived, whenever she spiraled into one of her perfection storms. My father would disappear into the garage during those episodes. Brielle would go upstairs and shut her bedroom door. And I stayed. I always stayed. Evelyn is mature. My mother loved telling people. What she really meant was useful. I paid for most of college myself. I worked part-time through nearly every semester while studying business administration and legal compliance. By 26, I was working at one of Charlotte's top litigation firms as a case analyst, specializing in financial investigations and corporate disputes. I was good at it too. Very good. I could build timelines from fragmented records, track hidden transactions, spot inconsistencies inside hundreds of pages of disclosures. People underestimated administrative professionals all the time. That was their first mistake. By 32, I bought my own townhouse in South End Charlotte without help from anyone. Brick exterior, open kitchen. Small rooftop patio. Nothing extravagant, but mine. My mother's response when she first saw it was, "It's smaller than I imagined." Not congratulations, not pride. Just evaluation. That was Lorraine Mercer in her purest form. Every moment passed through the filter of status first and emotion second. Then 4 years ago, I met Adrian Halley, and for the first time in my life, someone looked at me like I was a person instead of a role. We met at a charity gala for urban redevelopment projects in Charlotte. I almost didn't go because I had spent 11 hours preparing documents for a corporate fraud mediation, and my brain felt like wet cement. Adrian was standing near the balcony holding a bourbon glass and listening to someone explain bridge restoration funding with the patience of a saint. He was tall, 6'2" maybe. Dark hair. Calm eyes. The kind of calm that doesn't beg for attention because it doesn't need it. When the conversation finally ended, he looked at me and smiled. Not the polished social smile people use at events, a real one. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said. That sounds simple until you grow up in a house where listening only existed long enough for someone else to respond. 3 months into dating, I brought him to my parents' house for dinner, and the temperature in my family shifted instantly. Lorraine opened the front door wearing cream slacks and a smile that looked professionally assembled. "Adrian," she said warmly. "We've heard so much about you. My mother always sounded most dangerous when she sounded pleasant." Adrian brought flowers. And my mother watched Adrian carefully the entire night the way investors study unstable markets. Toward the end of dinner, she finally asked the question she'd clearly been holding. "So Adrian," she said while sipping wine, "what exactly does infrastructure architecture pay these days?" There it was. Money, status, measurement. Adrian answered politely, but later that night, after he drove home, my mother cornered me in the kitchen while loading the dishwasher. "He seems intelligent," she said casually. Whenever Lorraine Mercer sounded casual, danger was coming. "But?" She closed the dishwasher harder than necessary. "I just expected someone different for you." I remember standing there holding a wet plate. "Different how?" she shrugged. "More established." Adrian was 32 at the time, respected, successful, financially stable. But my mother heard that his father had been a mechanic and his mother worked as a nurse for 20 years and quietly placed him into a category she would never fully respect. Not elite enough, not polished enough, not from the right kind of family. I should have recognized the warning signs earlier. But love makes you hopeful in stupid ways. For a while, I kept believing she would come around. Instead, things got worse. That almost made it harder. Because every time we drove home from another uncomfortable dinner, I would apologize. And every single time, Adrian would squeeze my hand and say the same thing. "You don't have to apologize for wanting your family, but eventually even hope gets tired. Especially when your mother starts trying to replace the man you love with someone she personally selected." His name was Preston Calloway. That night, on the drive home, Adrian kept his eyes on the road longer than usual before finally speaking. "Your mother hates me." I stared out the passenger window. "No." I lied quietly. "She just thinks she knows what's best." But deep down, I already knew the truth. Lorraine Mercer didn't just dislike Adrian. She viewed him as an obstacle. And once my mother decided something threatened the future she imagined for me, she stopped seeing it as human. She saw it as something to remove. For the next 2 years, my mother treated my relationship like a phase that had somehow lasted too long, not openly. Lorraine Mercer was too intelligent for obvious cruelty. Everything she did lived inside plausible deniability, small comments, strategic exclusions, carefully timed comparisons. The kind of behavior that sounds harmless when repeated out loud but slowly erodes you anyway. At one family brunch, she spent 20 straight minutes talking about Preston Calloway's new investment property, while Adrian sat 3 seats away. At 36, she said loudly while cutting into her salad, "It's impressive when a man already owns multiple properties. That kind of ambition is rare." Brill nodded immediately. "Seriously? Men like that barely exist anymore." Adrian kept eating. Calm, silent, unbothered on the surface. But I saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. Then he finally leaned toward me and smiled. "You know," he said, "my mother always thought we'd end up together someday." I stared at him, not flirtatiously, not shyly, just stared. And for the first time, Preston looked uncomfortable. "That's never happening," I said plainly. Silence fell over the table. Lorraine laughed too quickly. "Oh, Evelyn. Don't be dramatic." But something changed after that lunch. My mother stopped pretending her intentions were subtle. When I got promoted to senior analyst after handling a massive corporate embezzlement case, Adrian showed up at my office with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant and flowers because he knew I hated crowded celebrations. When I had panic attacks before major litigation deadlines, he sat beside me quietly until my breathing slowed instead of telling me to calm down. He loved me carefully. My family had no framework for that kind of love, because it wasn't loud enough to impress people. Then came the engagement. Adrian proposed on a rainy October evening. No photographers, no audience, no hidden cameras. Just the two of us standing beneath the covered terrace of a botanical garden after almost everyone else had left because of the storm. Rain hammered against the glass roof overhead. My hair was frizzing from humidity. My shoes were soaked. We were laughing because the entire evening had gone wrong. And then Adrian reached into his coat pocket. Suddenly he looked nervous. Actually nervous. It was the first time I had ever seen it. "Evelyn," he said softly, "I know your life has taught you to carry everything alone." His voice shook once before steadying again. "But I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you don't have to." Then he opened the ring box. Simple diamond. Elegant band. Perfect. I started crying before he even finished asking. And for a moment, standing there beneath the sound of rain and thunder, I genuinely believed happiness could exist without consequences. I called my parents that night. My father answered first. "Sweetheart," he said sleepily, "we're engaged." There was a pause, then genuine warmth entered his voice. "Well, wow. Wow, honey, congratulations. Real happiness, not polished. Not calculated, just real." Then he handed the phone to my mother. Lorraine was silent for 3 full seconds. Long enough for my stomach to tighten. Finally she spoke. "Well," she said carefully, "that's certainly a big decision." That was her response to my engagement. Not congratulations. A performance review. Brill reacted even worse. She called me 20 minutes later sounding personally offended. "You're seriously getting married before me." I blinked. "What?" "I just thought I'd be first. Not congratulations either." Nobody in my family asked if I was happy. Only whether my decision fit the timeline they imagined. Still, against all logic, I kept trying. Because part of being the dependable daughter is believing love can still be earned if you work hard enough. The wedding planning began 6 months later. At first, my mother stayed unusually supportive. Too supportive. She recommended venues, florists, musicians. She called constantly asking if I needed help. And then one evening, she invited me to her house for wine. The moment I sat down, she slid a folder across the kitchen island. "I want to contribute," she said. Inside the folder was a cashier's check. $25,000. I stared at it. My mother had never given me money in my life without conditions attached. Not for college, not for my first apartment. Not when my car transmission died at 24 and I survived on instant noodles for a month. Now suddenly she wanted to help pay for my wedding? You don't have to do this, I said carefully. I want to, she replied. Her voice sounded softer than usual, almost emotional. You're my daughter, Evelyn. I know we haven't always agreed about things, but I want your wedding to be beautiful. For one dangerous moment, I believed her. That's the thing about daughters. Even grown ones. Part of you never stops wanting your mother to finally choose you honestly. I accepted the money. And that decision nearly destroyed my wedding. Over the next several months, Lorraine inserted herself into every aspect of planning. At first it seemed helpful. Then slowly things became strange. Guest list additions appeared without my approval. People I barely knew suddenly received invitations. Several were connected to the Callaways. Country club friends. Business associates. Families with old Charlotte money. When I questioned it, Lorraine brushed me off immediately. It's networking, Evelyn. Weddings are social events too. Then came the seating chart. My mother became weirdly obsessed with specific placements. Preston Calloway had to sit near the front, not front row. Too obvious, Lorraine joked once. But close. Eventually she settled on third row center aisle. At the time I thought it was annoying, nothing more. I had no idea that seat placement was part of an actual plan. Meanwhile, Brill treated the wedding like social media content. She filmed dress fittings, recorded makeup trials, complained constantly about colors, lighting, aesthetics. At one point she asked if we could adjust the ceremony timing for better sunset photos. I remember staring at her across the bakery tasting table wondering if we had genuinely been raised in the same house. The only thing keeping me sane through those months was Adrian. Whenever wedding stress overwhelmed me, he would pull me away from spreadsheets and contracts and seating arrangements. Come on, he'd say. You need air. Sometimes we'd walk through Freedom Park at night with coffee cups in hand. Sometimes we'd drive with no destination and listen to music. Sometimes we'd just sit quietly on my rooftop patio while the city lights flickered around us. One night, about 3 weeks before the wedding, Adrian looked at me carefully and asked a question that made my chest tighten immediately. Do you ever feel like your mother is planning something? I laughed too fast. What? She's acting. He searched for the word. Calculated. I looked away. Because the truth was, I felt it too. A strange pressure beneath everything. Like watching storm clouds gather miles away. You're overthinking, I said finally. Adrian nodded slowly. But he didn't look convinced. And neither was I. 5 days before the wedding, everything exploded. It happened on a Tuesday night. I had just finished reviewing compliance reports for a pharmaceutical fraud case when my phone started vibrating across my kitchen counter. Maya Bennett, my maid of honor. Calling at 10:47 p.m. Maya never called late unless something was wrong. The moment I answered, I heard it in her breathing. Are you home? My stomach dropped instantly. Yes, I'm coming over. What happened? A pause. Then quietly, I need you to see something before Saturday. The line disconnected. 20 minutes later, Maya was standing outside my townhouse in jeans and an oversized gray sweatshirt with rainwater still clinging to her hair. She looked sick, actually sick. The moment she stepped inside, she locked the door behind her. That scared me more than anything. Maya, I said slowly, what's going on? Instead of answering, she pulled out her phone. You know I go to Celeste Salon in Myers Park, right? I nodded. It's owned by Meredith Calloway's cousin. A strange cold feeling crept slowly through my chest. Maya swallowed. One of the receptionists accidentally sent screenshots into the wrong salon group chat tonight. She handed me the phone. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I saw my mother's name, Lorraine Mercer. And beneath it, everything is ready for Saturday. Preston just needs to stay calm until Walter reads the statement. My hands froze. Below that message was another. Meredith Calloway replied almost immediately. Once the guests hear the financial concerns publicly, Evelyn will come to her senses. The $50,000 will have been worth it. I stopped breathing for a second. 50,000. Not 25. 50. Maya scrolled further, and then I saw the message that changed everything. Lorenz replied. She won't go through with the ceremony once the truth is exposed in front of everyone. She cares too much about appearances to continue after the intervention. Intervention. My knees nearly gave out. I sat down hard on the kitchen stool. The room suddenly felt too bright, too small. Maya kept talking, but her voice sounded far away. There's more. She opened another screenshot. This one included detailed plans. My father reading a prepared statement. Questions about Adrian's finances. Claims about protecting me from instability. Instructions for Brielle to livestream part of the ceremony discreetly. And one final message from Meredith. Preston will be ready in the third row. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. $50,000. My mother had accepted $50,000 from another family to sabotage my wedding publicly and pressure me into marrying their son instead. Not metaphorically, literally. I sat there in silence so long Maya finally whispered, Evelyn? I looked up at her. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt something inside me break cleanly in half. I didn't cry immediately. That's the strange thing about real shock. People imagine screaming, collapse, drama, but actual betrayal arrives quietly at first. Your body goes cold. Your thoughts slow down. The world becomes unnaturally detailed. I remember noticing the hum of my refrigerator. The ticking sound from the kitchen clock. Rain tapping softly against the windows over my sink. Maya stood across from me waiting for a reaction while I stared at my mother's messages glowing on her phone. Scream. Intervention. The word replayed over and over in my head. Not conversation. Not concern. An intervention. Like I was an addict. A patient. A person incapable of making her own decisions. My mother had turned my wedding into a public correction. And somehow, impossibly, that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that she truly believed she was right. I finally looked up at Maya. How many people know? Only me, she said quickly. The receptionist deleted everything as soon as she realized what happened. I nodded slowly. My hands still felt numb. Did Adrian see this? No, I came straight here. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Maya asked the question sitting between us since she arrived. What do you want to do? I should have said cancel it. Any reasonable person probably would have. But something deep inside me had already shifted. Because for the first time in my life, I could suddenly see my family clearly, not emotionally. Not hopefully, clearly. Every guilt trip, every manipulation. Every moment I had been taught to stay quiet to keep the peace. And now they planned to humiliate the man I loved in front of 200 guests because he wasn't wealthy enough for my mother's fantasy. I stood up slowly. Then I reached for my phone. I'm calling Adrian. He arrived 11 minutes later. I know because I watched the microwave clock the entire time. 11:14, 11:19. 11:23. Then headlights swept across my front windows. Adrian walked through the door still wearing work boots and a dark jacket over a wrinkled blue button-down. His face tightened immediately when he saw mine. What happened? I couldn't speak at first, so Maya handed him the phone. I watched Adrian read every screenshot silently. His expression barely changed. That somehow made it worse. When he finished, he handed the phone back carefully and looked at me, not angry, not panicked, just deeply sad. She really planned this? I nodded. My throat finally tightened, and then the tears came. Violent tears. Not graceful crying. The kind that hurts your ribs. I sat on the kitchen floor because suddenly standing felt impossible, and Adrian came down beside me immediately, one arm around my shoulders, one hand against the back of my head, steady, always steady. I'm sorry, I whispered against his chest. The second the words left my mouth, Adrian pulled back slightly. No. His voice was firm enough to stop me instantly. You are not apologizing for this. But my family, this is not your fault, Evelyn. His jaw tightened for the first time that night. What they're doing is insane. Maya sat quietly at the counter pretending not to listen while giving us enough privacy to fall apart. I wiped my face with shaking hands. We have to cancel. Adrian looked at me for a long moment. Then he surprised me completely. No, I blinked. What? We're not canceling our wedding. The certainty in his voice stunned me. They want control, he continued calmly. If we cancel, they win. I stared at him. Adrian, they're planning to ambush us publicly. No. You heard the messages. I did. And you still want to go through with it? He reached for my hand. Yes. Simple, certain. Yes. For the next hour, the three of us sat around my kitchen island building a plan. And somewhere in the middle of that planning, something changed inside me permanently. Fear slowly turned into clarity. Then clarity turned into resolve. My mother thought public pressure would break me, because public pressure had controlled me my entire life. She didn't realize I had spent 10 years building legal cases for a living. Evidence calms me. Facts steady me. And Lorraine Mercer had left a paper trail, a massive one. Maya helped gather screenshots from the salon employee before they disappeared completely. Adrian opened his laptop and started organizing timelines. Meanwhile, I went into work mode. Emotion off. Analysis on. Within 2 hours, we uncovered more than I expected. The original cashier's check my mother gave me came from a joint account recently linked to large transfers from Meredith Calavis Business Holdings. Then Maya found something even worse. A partially public transaction history connected to Meredith's assistant, large payments labeled event coordination, family arrangement, ceremony planning, all routed within days of meetings between our families. We let them do it. Silence. Adrian studied my face. You sure? I nodded slowly. They built this whole performance expecting me to stay silent. I looked down at the evidence. I'm done being silent. The next 4 days became the hardest acting job of my life. Because while my mother finalized plans to destroy my wedding publicly, I smiled through every conversation pretending I knew nothing. Lorraine called constantly. 3 times Wednesday, twice Thursday, 4 times Friday. If the two of you still want to be married afterward, I'll finish the ceremony no matter what happens. I nearly cried hearing that. Maya stored printed evidence inside a navy blue document envelope and kept it locked inside her apartment. I informed one other person, Julian Cross, senior partner at my firm. My mentor for almost 7 years. He was already attending the wedding. When I explained the situation over coffee Thursday morning, he leaned back slowly in his chair. The entire restaurant quieted immediately. Lorraine lifted her champagne glass gracefully. To my daughter, she said warmly. Then she paused, a tiny pause, but I noticed it. To her future, not Adrian, not us, just her future. The omission hung in the air like smoke. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Adrian reached under the table and took my hand. And somehow, that tiny gesture steadied me more than the champagne ever could. The morning of the wedding arrived gray and humid. Charlotte weather in late June, heavy clouds, warm air, the threat of rain lingering somewhere beyond the skyline. I woke at 5:40 a.m. after maybe 2 hours of sleep. For a moment, lying in silence beneath pale morning light, I forgot everything. Then reality returned all at once. The intervention, the money, the speeches. The third row seat, I sat up slowly. And the first thing I felt wasn't fear anymore, it was anger. Cold anger. "You look stunning," she said warmly the second she saw me. Then she kissed my cheek. I nearly flinched. But I held still, because the show wasn't over yet. My mother moved around the bridal suite like she owned the building. Straightening flowers, adjusting makeup brushes, giving instructions to the coordinator nobody had asked for. Every few minutes she glanced at me with an expression that almost looked emotional. At the time years ago, that expression would have confused me. Now I recognized it clearly, anticipation. Lorraine Mercer genuinely believed that, by the end of the ceremony, I would leave Adrian standing at the altar and walk away with the future she had chosen for me. That realization settled over me with an almost eerie calm. Because once you fully understand someone's delusion, they stop being unpredictable. At 9:40, Brielle arrived carrying a white designer bag and 2 phones. 2, one for personal use, one for content. Of course. "Okay," she announced while walking into the room. "The lighting outside is actually amazing today." I stared at her through the mirror. For the first time in my life, I truly saw my sister clearly too. Not evil, just hollowed out by validation. Everything in Brielle's life existed through a camera lens first and emotional reality second. She hugged me quickly, then immediately stepped back. "Oh my God, wait. Don't move." Before I could respond, she lifted her phone and started recording. Like guilt somehow carried physical weight. "What is it?" I asked. "Just something I wanted you to read after the ceremony." After, not before. Because she expected the ceremony to end differently. I slipped the envelope onto the vanity table beside my makeup kit. Then I watched my mother smile at herself in the mirror before leaving the room. The second the door shut behind her, the atmosphere changed completely. Silence, real silence. Maya crossed the room immediately. "She's terrifying." I let out a slow breath. Yes. Outside the bridal suite windows, guests had started arriving. Black cars rolled up the curved driveway one after another. Women in formal dresses stepped carefully across the stone paths. Men adjusted jackets in the summer heat. 200 people walking unknowingly into an emotional landmine. At 10:17, Maya locked the suite door. Then she pulled the navy envelope from her bag. "We should go over everything one last time," I nodded. My mother had assigned a price to my future. Worse, she thought she was justified doing it. Maya touched one of the screenshots gently. "You ready?" I looked down at the messages again. Once the guests hear the concerns publicly, Evelyn won't go through with it. The intervention will force the truth into the open. Preston just needs to stay calm. Stay calm, like they were preparing him for a business acquisition instead of my wedding. His gaze lingered on me a second longer than usual. People who work with couples for decades learn how to read faces. I think he knew this was no ordinary wedding day. "If anything interrupts the ceremony," he said carefully, "remember that marriage is still a choice between 2 people, not an audience." I nearly cried hearing that. Instead, I smiled faintly. "Thank you." After he left, Maya looked at me. "You know," she said softly, "most people would have run by now." Tears burned instantly behind my eyes. "You understand?" "Yes." "Good." Another pause. Then quietly, "I love you, Evelyn. I love you too." When the call ended, I stared at my reflection for a long moment. White dress, pinned hair, pearl earrings, calm face. I looked like a woman walking into a beautiful ceremony, not a woman preparing for war. At 10:55, the wedding coordinator appeared at the suite door. "We're ready." My pulse slowed strangely. Not faster, slower. The final calm before impact. Maya picked up the navy envelope and slipped it into my satin clutch. Then she squeezed my hand. "No matter what happens," she whispered, "you're not alone today." I nodded once. Outside, string music drifted softly through the gardens. Guests were seated now. The ceremony lawn glowed beneath late morning light filtering through gray clouds. Somewhere out there, my mother was smiling at people. Somewhere out there, my father was holding a speech he didn't write. Somewhere out there, Preston Calloway was sitting in the third row waiting for my life to collapse neatly into the future they prepared for him. And somewhere at the altar, Adrian was waiting for me. The coordinator opened the suite doors fully. Warm air rushed inside carrying the scent of roses and freshly cut grass. Then the music changed. The processional began. Bridesmaids stepped forward one by one. Soft applause drifted through the gardens. Maya paused beside me just before her turn. Wind moved gently through the fabric draped above the pergola. Reverend Monroe stepped toward the podium and opened his ceremony book. "Dearly beloved," he began warmly, "we are gathered here today." "Wait." My mother's voice cut cleanly through the garden. Instant silence. Every guest froze. I closed my eyes once. There it was, the moment she had planned for months. Lorraine stepped forward gracefully and took the microphone from my father with smooth confidence. Not nervous. Not hesitant. Prepared. She turned toward the audience first. Then toward me, and finally toward Adrian. "I'm sorry," she said dramatically, "but before this ceremony continues, there are serious concerns that need to be addressed." A ripple moved through the crowd immediately. Confused whispers. Shifted posture. Sudden tension. Brielle lifted her phone instantly from the bridesmaid line. Recording. Of course she was recording. Lorraine inhaled slowly. And then she began. "My daughter is about to make the biggest mistake of her life." The words landed across the garden like shattered glass. A collective murmur spread instantly through the guests. Someone near the back whispered, "Oh my God." Another person laughed nervously, thinking maybe this was some bizarre joke. It wasn't. Lorraine stood at the altar holding the microphone with the confidence of a woman who believed she was moments away from saving her daughter publicly. She turned toward the crowd slowly. "You all know how much I love Evelyn," she continued, voice trembling just enough to sound emotional without losing control. "And because I love her, I cannot stand here silently while she enters a marriage built on incomplete truths." Adrian's hand remained steady in mine, but I felt his pulse quicken slightly. My father stood behind Lorraine looking pale and deeply uncomfortable. The speech pages trembled faintly in his hands. He looked like a man realizing too late that he had stepped into something ugly. Lorraine faced the audience again. "As parents," she said carefully, "sometimes we have to protect our children from decisions driven by emotion rather than reality." There it was. The performance, the concerned mother, the noble sacrifice, the public rescue mission. My entire childhood condensed into one moment. She extended her hand toward my father. "Walter," she said softly, "please read it." My father hesitated, just for a second. But I noticed. Lorraine noticed too. Her expression hardened almost invisibly. "Walter." He swallowed hard. Then slowly stepped forward holding the folded papers. I looked at him carefully. At the silver watch on his wrist. At the sweat gathering near his collar. At the exhaustion in his eyes. For the first time in my life, my father didn't look passive. He looked trapped. Walter lifted the microphone. Adrian, he began unevenly, we have concerns regarding your financial stability and long-term ability to support Evelyn appropriately. A wave of whispers spread again. Adrian remained motionless. Walter continued reading. We recently became aware of significant financial inconsistencies that raise serious questions about whether this marriage is truly in Evelyn's best interest. His voice cracked slightly. Because none of these words belong to him. They belong to Lorraine. Every sentence sounded unnatural in his mouth. We believe Evelyn deserves transparency before making a permanent commitment that could affect her future security. Security. My mother always weaponized that word, not emotional security. Financial security, social security, status security. Everything measurable, everything visible. Walter lowered the page briefly and looked at me. Pain flickered across his face. Then Lorraine stepped closer behind him. Close enough to pressure him silently. He continued. We believe there may still be time to reconsider this decision before irreversible damage is done. A stunned silence followed. Even the wind seemed to stop moving through the garden. 200 guests sat frozen in their chairs watching my family implode in real time. And then Lorraine took the microphone back, smoothly, professionally, like the transition had been rehearsed, because it had. I know this is difficult, she said, voice thick with manufactured emotion. But one day, Evelyn will understand why we had to do this. Briel's phone remained pointed directly at my face, waiting for tears, for a collapse, for humiliation. Lorraine unfolded another sheet of paper slowly. A letter. Of course she wrote a letter. My mother loved prepared emotion. Evelyn, she began softly, your father and I have spent months praying that you would see reason. Months. She admitted it openly. Months of planning. Months of manipulation. Months of deciding my future behind closed doors, like I was a business arrangement instead of a person. You are intelligent, Lorraine continued. Successful, beautiful, you have opportunities most women would dream of. And yet you are choosing a man who cannot elevate the life you've worked so hard to build. A sharp inhale came from somewhere in the audience. Adrian still didn't react, not outwardly. But I knew him. I knew exactly how much restraint it took for him to stand there silently while my mother dissected his worth in front of everyone we knew. Lorraine turned slightly toward him. Adrian may care about you, she said carefully, but caring about someone does not make someone capable of providing the future they deserve. Then came the final blow. The line she had clearly rehearsed dozens of times. There is still someone here today who can give you the life you were meant for. And slowly, deliberately, she pointed toward the third row. Every head in the garden turned simultaneously. Preston Calloway froze completely, his face drained of color. He looked horrified. Not triumphant, horrified. Preston has loved you quietly for years, Lorraine said. He comes from a family that understands partnership, stability, and long-term commitment. I heard Maya mutter Jesus Christ behind me. Lorraine stepped closer toward me now. Her voice softened dramatically. We can still fix this, Evelyn. Fix, that word again. Like love was damaged, like Adrian was damaged. Like my choices were damaged. Please, she whispered into the microphone. Don't throw your life away. Silence swallowed the garden whole. No birds. No music, no movement. 200 people stared at me waiting to see whether I would break. My mother believed she knew exactly what would happen next. Because historically, pressure had always worked on me. Guilt had always worked. Expectation had always worked. Family obligation had always worked. Lorraine built her entire identity around the certainty that eventually I would fold. But something inside me had changed the night I saw those screenshots. I looked at Adrian. He met my eyes calmly, no panic, no pleading, just trust. And suddenly I understood something clearly. My mother has spent my entire life teaching me to fear public disappointment. But Adrian has spent 4 years teaching me I didn't need to earn love through obedience. That difference changed everything. I slowly released Adrian's hand. Gasps rippled through the audience immediately. Lorraine noticed too. For one brief second, satisfaction flashed across her face. She thought she won. Then I turned calmly toward Maya and held out my hand. Maya immediately reached into her bouquet arrangement and pulled out the navy blue document envelope hidden beneath the flowers. This is a screenshot from a private conversation accidentally sent into the wrong group chat 5 days ago. The crowd leaned forward collectively. Even Brielle lowered her phone slightly. I read directly from the message. Everything is ready for Saturday. Preston just needs to stay calm until Walter reads the statement. Murmurs erupted immediately. Lorraine took a step forward. Evelyn. I raised one hand without looking at her. No. Someone actually said, what? The entire atmosphere shattered instantly. Confusion exploded across every row. 50,000? Worth it. Lorraine stepped toward me quickly now. You don't understand. I finally turned toward her fully. No, I said quietly. You didn't think I would. And for the first time all day? My mother looked afraid. The silence after that felt physically heavy. Not quiet, heavy. Like the entire garden had suddenly tilted sideways and everyone inside it was trying to understand whether they were still standing on stable ground. My mother stared at me in complete disbelief, not because the evidence existed, because I was actually using it. Lorraine Mercer built her entire life around one assumption, that I would always protect the family image before protecting myself. And now, in front of 200 guests, I was breaking that rule publicly. I lifted another document from the envelope. My hands were perfectly steady. Years in litigation had trained me well. March 14th, I said clearly into the microphone. $25,000 transferred from Meredith Calloway to Lorraine Mercer. Murmurs spread immediately again. I raised the second page. August 22nd, another transfer. $25,000. Then I looked directly at the audience. That's $50,000 total. Someone near the front whispered, "Oh my God," I continued. The transaction notes on both transfers were labeled family arrangement. This time the reaction hit harder. People shifted visibly in their seats now, whispering, turning toward each other, trying to process what they were hearing. And somewhere in the middle rows, I heard someone say it out loud. She sold her daughter. The sentence cut through the garden like broken glass. My mother's composure cracked instantly. That is not what happened, Lorraine snapped suddenly. There she was, not graceful anymore, not polished, just angry. I turned toward her slowly. Then explain it. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked toward Meredith Calloway. Meredith looked away immediately. That told me everything. My father still hadn't moved from the edge of the altar. He looked physically ill now. He stared at my mother like he was seeing a stranger slowly emerge from inside her skin. Lorraine tried again. It was never about money. Really? I asked calmly. I lifted another page. Because according to these messages, you accepted $50,000 in exchange for publicly stopping my wedding and pressuring me into a relationship with Preston Calloway. That's not. You coordinated speeches. I lifted another screenshot. You planned a public intervention. Another page. You instructed Brielle to record my reaction. At that, every eye in the garden snapped toward my sister. Brielle froze completely. Her phone slowly lowered from her hand. Color drained from her face. Brielle? Someone whispered from the audience. She looked trapped. Like a child suddenly realizing a prank had become catastrophic. I didn't. She started weakly. I didn't know everything. For the first time all morning, I actually believed her. I think Brill knew there would be drama. I don't think she understood the scale of betrayal behind it. Lorraine turned toward her immediately. Don't start. That tone, sharp, cold, warning. Brill flinched instinctively. And suddenly, for one brief painful moment, I saw my sister the way she really was. Not malicious, conditioned, raised inside the same machinery that raised me. Just weaker against it. I turned back toward the audience. My mother told me she contributed $25,000 toward this wedding because she wanted to support me. I held up the bank records. That money wasn't hers. A woman near the aisle covered her mouth with her hand. Someone else muttered, "This is insane." Yes, it was insane. That was the point. Because abuse looks unbelievable once exposed publicly, it only survives in silence. Lorraine stepped closer toward me now. Her eyes had gone glassy. You are humiliating this family. There it was. Not, I'm sorry, not, I made a mistake. Just humiliation. Image, reputation, always reputation. I looked at her for a very long moment before answering. You planned to destroy my marriage in front of 200 people. My voice remained calm, almost frighteningly calm. You accused Adrian of financial dishonesty without proof. I lifted another document, which is interesting considering I happen to have his verified financial records right here. Now the audience fully erupted. Actual audible reactions spread across the garden, because suddenly people understood. Lorraine hadn't just opposed the marriage. She had fabricated a narrative. I looked toward Adrian. He still stood exactly where he had from the beginning. Calm, silent, watching me with an expression I would remember for the rest of my life. Pride, not because I was exposing my family, because I had finally stopped shrinking for them. I opened another folder tab. Adrian Howley has 0 outstanding debt. I looked directly at my mother. His credit score is 819. A few shocked laughs escaped the crowd. He owns investment shares in 2 infrastructure development projects and has been employed continuously for over 11 years. I paused, which means the only people lying publicly today. I slowly lowered the papers. Are my family. Lorraine looked like she'd been slapped. My father finally moved. One slow step forward, then another. Lorraine. His voice sounded hollow, small. My mother didn't look at him. Walter swallowed hard. Did you really take that money? The question echoed through the garden. And suddenly every single person there leaned into the answer. Lorraine's breathing visibly changed. Fast now, uneven, because for the first time since this began she no longer controlled the room. I did this for her, she said desperately. Not denial, justification. That was worse. She doesn't understand the kind of life she's throwing away. Her voice cracked loudly now. You understand I'm trying to protect her. Nobody answered. Nobody, because the illusion had shattered too completely. Then something unexpected happened. Preston Calloway stood up. Every head turned toward him instantly. He looked exhausted, ashamed, and much younger somehow than he had earlier. He straightened his jacket slowly before speaking. I didn't know about the money. His voice shook. Meredith Calloway's face snapped toward him. Preston, no. He looked directly at me. Past the guests, past the string quartet, past the photographers frozen in shock. His mother called after him once. He never looked back. The garden gates slammed shut behind him. Silence followed, deep silence. And in that silence, my mother finally understood. The plan was dead, completely dead, no recovery. No spin, no saving face. Everything she built had collapsed publicly. Lorraine looked suddenly older standing there beneath gray skies and white flowers. Not powerful anymore. Just tired. Broken by her own obsession. Then my father did something that shocked me more than anything else that day. He stepped toward my mother and took the speech papers from her hand. Not aggressively, quietly, he looked down at them for a moment, then crumpled them slowly in his fist. "I trusted you," he whispered. Lorraine's face fell instantly. "Walter, you lied to me." His voice cracked painfully now. "You made me stand up here and attack him." He glanced toward Adrian briefly. Not the strategist, not the controller. Just a scared mother who believed love without security eventually turned into suffering. But fear becomes dangerous when it decides other people's lives for them. I answered quietly. "So you tried to buy my future instead?" Lorraine flinched. The sentence hit harder because it was true. She opened her mouth, closed it again. And suddenly I realized something strange. My mother genuinely thought her intentions excused her actions. That was the tragedy. Because after years of manipulation and emotional negotiations and conditional love, there he was, still giving me freedom. I smiled through tears, finally threatening my composure. "Yes," I said softly. Then louder, "Yes, I would." The audience erupted instantly, not polite applause, relief, real relief. People clapped loudly, some stood, some laughed shakily. The emotional pressure burst open all at once. And for the first time all day, I finally breathed properly. Reverend Naomi smiled warmly. "Then let's begin again." My mother still stood near the podium, forgotten now. Not literally, but emotionally. The center of attention had moved away from her, and she knew it. That might have been the cruelest consequence of all. She slowly stepped backward off the platform. Nobody stopped her. Nobody called after her. Brielle looked torn apart watching it happen. My sister glanced between me and our mother helplessly, then finally lowered her phone completely. The live stream ended, at last. Lorraine descended the steps slowly and disappeared down the side garden path alone. No dramatic exit, no final speech, just silence. I watched her go. And despite everything, my chest still hurt. Because grief doesn't disappear simply because someone deserves consequences. Adrian touched my hand gently. I looked at him. He smiled softly. And somehow that steadied the entire world again. Reverend Naomi reopened her ceremony book. "We are gathered here today." This time, nobody interrupted. The vows felt different now, stronger somehow. Stripped down to their real meaning, not performance, not family approval, not appearances, choice, pure choice. I looked directly into Adrian's eyes when it was my turn. "My whole life," I said quietly, "I thought love meant proving myself useful enough not to be abandoned." Emotion tightened my throat. "But you never asked me to earn your love." Adrian's eyes filled immediately. "You gave it freely." I smiled through tears now. "And after today, I think that may be the bravest thing anyone has ever done for me." The garden was silent again. But this silence felt warm, safe. Adrian took my hands carefully. "I knew from the beginning," he said softly, "that loving you would require patience." A few emotional laughs spread through the crowd. He smiled slightly. "But I never once doubted you'd eventually see yourself the way I saw you." That broke me. Completely. Tears spilled down my face instantly. Not from humiliation. Not from pain. Relief. Years and years of exhaustion finally loosening. Adrian squeezed my hands gently. "I don't care about winning against your family," he continued. "I only care that when all of this is over, you still know you're loved." People openly cried now. Even Maya wiped tears from her face beside me. Reverend Naomi smiled knowingly. "May we have the rings?" Maya handed them over carefully. My fingers trembled slightly this time, not from fear, from emotion finally catching up to me. Adrian slid the ring onto my hand slowly. Steady, intentional, real, Not transactional. Not strategic. Real. When Reverend Naomi pronounced us husband and wife, the applause exploded across the garden so loudly it startled birds from the nearby hedges. Adrian kissed me gently beneath the white flowers hanging from the pergola, and in that moment, everything became quiet inside me. Not around me. Inside me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel responsible for managing everyone else's emotions. I didn't feel guilty for disappointing someone. I didn't feel like love needed to be negotiated. I just felt free. When we turned back toward the crowd, people were standing again, clapping, cheering, wiping tears. Some guests looked emotionally exhausted from witnessing the entire disaster unfold. Others looked strangely inspired, like they had watched something painful but important. Then my eyes drifted toward the third row. The empty seat where Preston had been sitting still faced the altar, untouched now. A perfect symbol of everything my mother thought should have mattered: status, connections, security, and yet none of it had survived the truth. Adrian followed my gaze briefly, then leaned close enough for only me to hear. "You okay?" I looked at him. At this man who had endured humiliation publicly without once making the moment about himself. And I realized something extraordinary. My family spent 33 years teaching me love was conditional. Adrian undid it quietly in 4. I smiled. "Yeah," I whispered. Then I squeezed his hand tightly. "I finally am." The walk back down the aisle felt completely different from the one before. The guests smiled now instead of staring. The atmosphere felt lighter, human again. As we passed the rows of chairs, people reached out softly to touch our hands or shoulders. Not out of pity. Support. Maya leaned toward me as we passed and whispered, "You absolutely destroyed her." I laughed unexpectedly. A real laugh, the kind that escapes before you can stop it. Adrian grinned beside me. By the time we reached the garden gates, the string quartet had finally started playing again. Soft music floated across the estate while guests slowly began moving toward cocktail hour. And for a brief moment, standing there beneath cloudy Tennessee skies with my husband beside me, I forgot about the betrayal completely. Because joy had finally become louder than fear. Cocktail hour carried the strange emotional energy of people recovering from witnessing something historic. Clusters of guests gathered beneath hanging lanterns and ivy-covered trellises, holding champagne glasses while whispering in stunned disbelief. Everywhere I looked, conversations stopped the second Adrian and I walked past, not because people disapproved, because nobody quite knew what to say after watching a mother attempt to publicly dismantle her daughter's wedding. The catering staff moved carefully through the crowd carrying trays of champagne and miniature crab cakes like they were navigating a crime scene. Adrian leaned toward me quietly. "You hungry?" I stared at him, then laughed again. A real laugh. "You're asking me that now? You haven't eaten since half a granola bar this morning." That was true. And somehow the normalcy of that observation grounded me more than any comforting speech could have. I took a champagne glass from a passing tray. My hand trembled slightly now that the adrenaline had begun fading. Maya appeared beside us almost instantly. "Okay," she said breathlessly. "I need at least 10 business days to emotionally process what just happened." Adrian smirked faintly. "You and everyone else." "No," Maya replied immediately. "I'm serious. That may have been the most insane wedding ceremony in Tennessee history." A nearby guest overheard and muttered, "Probably top 5 nationally." That triggered nervous laughter from 3 separate people standing nearby. The tension was finally dissolving, slowly, but underneath the relief, I still felt hollowed out emotionally. Like someone had reached into my chest and rearranged entire parts of me during the ceremony. Maya studied my face carefully. "You okay?" I answered honestly, "I don't know yet." and that was the truth. Because survival mode had carried me through the altar confrontation. But now everything was catching up at once. The betrayal, the humiliation, the grief, the relief. It all collided together inside me in messy waves. Adrian touched the small of my back gently. No words, just presence. That was his gift. He never crowded pain. He stayed beside it until it passed. Across the pavilion, guests slowly settled into reception seating while soft jazz floated through the speakers overhead. The fairy lights hanging across the ceiling beams flickered warmly as dusk began rolling across the estate grounds outside. Everything looked beautiful and strangely normal, like the wedding itself was trying to heal around the damage. Then I noticed something. The family table, 3 empty seats. My mother's, my father's, Briel's. White napkins still folded neatly beside untouched champagne glasses. A sharp ache hit my chest unexpectedly. Because despite everything, they were still my family. Adrian followed my gaze immediately. You don't have to look at them. I know. But I did anyway. Because grief demands witnesses. Maya squeezed my shoulder once before drifting off toward the bar area, wisely giving us space. Adrian and I stood quietly together near the dance floor while guests continued filtering inside. Finally, he asked softly, "Do you regret exposing her publicly?" The question wasn't accusatory, just careful, thoughtful. I considered it honestly, then shook my head. No. The answer surprised even me slightly. Not because humiliating my mother felt good. It didn't. But because silence would have destroyed me instead. If I hadn't said something, I continued quietly, she would have rewritten the story forever. Adrian nodded slowly. And he understood immediately. That was another thing about him. He understood emotional realities most people try to argue away logically. She would have told everyone she tried to save you, he said softly. Yes, and eventually people would have believed it. I looked down at my wedding ring. Simple platinum, elegant, uncomplicated, real. Yes, I whispered. That silence would have become another prison. A server passed carrying champagne. Adrian took 2 glasses this time and handed me one. You survived, he said. I laughed weakly. Barely. No, he replied gently. You survived completely. That nearly broke me again. Because for most of my life, survival meant enduring quietly. But today survival had looked different. Today it looked like speaking. The DJ tapped the microphone lightly. Ladies and gentlemen, if everyone could please take their seats. The reception officially began. People settled gradually around candlelit tables decorated with white roses and eucalyptus garlands. The room still buzzed with emotional aftershocks. I doubted anyone there would ever attend another normal wedding again. Adrian pulled out my chair beside him at the sweetheart table near the center of the pavilion. As I sat down, I noticed something else. Meredith Calloway's seat sat empty too. So did Preston's. The entire fantasy my mother built had vanished before dinner service even started. The DJ smiled awkwardly from his booth. Well, he said carefully into the microphone, I think we can all agree this wedding has already been unforgettable. The entire pavilion burst into laughter. Even I laughed hard enough to wipe tears from beneath my eyes. Thank God for humor. Without it, the emotional weight might have crushed everyone completely. Dinner service began shortly afterward. Conversation slowly normalized around the room, not entirely, but enough. People started talking about work again. Travel, music, the cake. Human things, it felt important somehow. Proof that life continues even after catastrophic moments. Halfway through dinner, Hector Lawson approached our table holding a whiskey glass. Hector had mentored me since my second year at Whitmore and Kane Legal Group. He was in his late 50s with silver hair and the calm confidence of a man who had spent decades winning impossible cases. He looked at me carefully, then Adrian. Then shook his head once. "I've practiced litigation for 32 years, he said. And I've never seen a cross-examination executed more efficiently at a wedding altar. Adrian laughed into his drink. I covered my face briefly. Hector, no, he continued firmly. I mean this sincerely. You stayed composed under extraordinary emotional pressure. Most people would have detonated. I almost did, but you didn't. He raised his glass slightly toward me. That matters. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in my throat again. The realization felt unfamiliar and healing. A little later, Mia stood to give her maid of honor toast. She adjusted the microphone dramatically. Okay, she began. First of all, legally speaking, I think today counts as at least 3 separate felonies. The room exploded laughing. Even the servers laughed. Maya grinned proudly. But seriously. Her expression softened immediately as she looked at me. I've known Evelyn for 13 years. Silence settled softly across the pavilion. Not uncomfortable, tender, Maya lifted her champagne glass. To the couple who survived a public psychological warfare event and still got married anyway. The room erupted laughing and applauding again. I laughed so hard I nearly cried. Adrian leaned close. She's never letting us live this down. Absolutely not. Dinner transitioned into dancing soon afterward, and somehow, the night slowly transformed into an actual wedding reception. Not a scandal, not a disaster, a wedding. Adrian pulled me gently onto the dance floor as a slow song began playing overhead. Fairy lights glowed softly across the wooden beams above us. The world outside the pavilion had turned deep blue with evening. He wrapped one arm around my waist carefully. I rested my head briefly against his chest. For a while, neither of us spoke. We simply moved together slowly beneath warm lights and fading adrenaline. Then quietly, Adrian asked, "What are you feeling right now?" I answered honestly. "Everything." He smiled softly against my hair. "Yeah, me too." I closed my eyes briefly. And for the first time all day, I finally allowed myself to feel happy. Not relieved, not victorious. Happy, because despite all the chaos, I had married the right person. And suddenly that felt larger than everything else combined. By 9:30, the reception had transformed completely. The earlier shock still lingered beneath the surface of conversations, but now it existed alongside laughter, music, clinking glasses, and crowded dance floors. Human beings are strangely resilient that way. Even after witnessing emotional catastrophe, eventually someone requests a dance song, someone orders another drink, and life insists on continuing. The DJ shifted into a mix of older soul music and early 2000s throwbacks. Maya immediately dragged 3 bridesmaids onto the dance floor like a woman personally responsible for repairing the emotional atmosphere of the entire wedding. And honestly, she succeeded. At one point, I caught Adrian laughing openly while watching Maya aggressively teach Hector Lawson choreography to a Beyoncé song. That image alone nearly justified the entire day. I stood near the edge of the pavilion holding a glass of sparkling water when Marcus Hawley approached me, Adrian's older brother. I looked toward the far side of the pavilion. Denise Hawley sat laughing softly with 2 elderly relatives near the dessert table. She looked relaxed, warm, safe. The complete opposite of every emotionally exhausting family gathering I grew up attending. I don't know what to do with that, I admitted quietly. Marcus nodded like he understood exactly what I meant. Yeah, he said. Healthy love feels suspicious at first. That sentence lodged directly into my chest. Because it was true. Part of me still waited for hidden conditions beneath every kindness, every compliment, every supportive gesture. My nervous system literally didn't know what unconditional affection was supposed to feel like. Marcus looked toward Adrian dancing with Maya in the middle of the floor. He spent 4 years trying not to pressure you about your family. I watched Adrian laugh as Maya spun dramatically beneath the lights. I know. He worried if he pushed too hard, you'd feel forced to choose. Emotion tightened in my throat again. Because that had been exactly my fear. Marcus smiled slightly. But today? He continued. Today you chose yourself first. That's different. I looked down at my wedding ring again. Simple platinum catching warm reception light. Not flashy, not status-driven. Just honest. The way Adrian loved me. Marcus clapped my shoulder gently before heading back toward the dance floor. And suddenly I realized something painful. I felt safer with Adrian's family after 4 years than I had ever felt with my own. Not because they were perfect. Because they didn't require performance. Around 10:15, the cake cutting finally happened. The wedding coordinator looked emotionally exhausted by this point, but determined to salvage normal traditions wherever possible. The cake itself was beautiful. 3 tiers. Ivory frosting. Fresh flowers cascading down one side. My mother had fought aggressively for an elaborate gold-trimmed design that looked like something from a royal banquet. I chose this instead. Simple, clean, elegant. Another small rebellion I hadn't fully recognized at the time. Adrian stood beside me holding the cake knife while cameras flashed around us. Think anyone's still talking about the ceremony, he whispered. I snorted laughing. Probably forever. Fair. We cut the cake together while guests applauded. And for one perfect moment, everything actually felt normal. No betrayal, no public confrontation, no manipulation. Just 2 people celebrating their wedding. Then, naturally, Maya ruined the emotional stability again. Don't smash it in her face, she yelled from across the room. The entire pavilion burst into laughter. Adrian looked deeply tempted for exactly half a second. I'm watching you, I warned. I'm a structural engineer, he replied solemnly. I respect stability. That joke somehow hit me harder than it should have. I laughed so suddenly I nearly dropped the plate. And God, it felt good to laugh. Later that evening, while guests crowded the dance floor again, I slipped outside alone for air. The estate gardens were quiet now. Soft pathway lights glowed along the stone walkways while distant music drifted from inside the pavilion. The night air felt cooler, calmer. I walked slowly toward the pergola where the ceremony had happened earlier. Most of the chairs had already been removed by staff. Only scattered rose petals remained across the stone aisle. I stared at the empty altar for a long time, trying to process the fact that only hours earlier, my entire life had detonated right there. Footsteps sounded softly behind me. I turned expecting Adrian. Instead, it was Brielle. My sister stood several feet away wearing her pale blue bridesmaid dress with her heels dangling from one hand. Mascara stains marked faint lines beneath her eyes. She looked exhausted. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then quietly she said, "Mom's gone." I crossed my arms instinctively. Okay, she left before dinner. Still defensive, still careful. Brielle nodded slowly. She and Dad had a huge fight in the parking lot. Pain flickered across her face. I looked away toward the empty ceremony chairs. Part of me didn't want to hear any of it. Another part desperately did. She told me recording it would protect the family, Brielle admitted shakily. She said if things got ugly online later, we'd have proof she tried to stop you from making a mistake. The manipulation was so painfully familiar I almost smiled. Lorraine always framed control as protection. Always. Brielle wiped her face quickly. When you started reading the documents, She shook her head slowly. I thought I was gonna throw up. I believed that too. The silence between us softened slightly. Maybe nothing. Trauma rearranges families unpredictably. I looked at her carefully. You need to figure out who you are when mom isn't telling you. Brielle's face crumpled slightly. Because she understood exactly what I meant. She has spent her entire life orbiting Laurent's approval, just like I had once. The difference was, I finally escaped it. Brielle stared down at her shoes for several seconds before speaking again. You really love him, don't you? I looked through the pavilion windows toward Adrien laughing with his cousins near the dance floor, and instantly my chest softened. Yes, I whispered. Completely. Brielle followed my gaze, then smiled sadly. I think that's why she panicked. I frowned slightly. What? She couldn't control this one. That sentence lingered heavily between us, because Brielle was right. My mother never feared rebellion. She feared emotional independence. And loving Adrien had slowly made me independent from her approval. That was the real threat. Brielle slipped her shoes back on slowly. I should go. Part of me wanted to stop her. Another part still hurt too badly, so I simply nodded. She turned to leave, then stopped after a few steps. Without facing me, she said quietly, For what it's worth, I'm glad you married him. And then she walked away into the dark. I stood alone beside the empty pergola for a long time after that. Listening to distant music, feeling cool wind move through scattered rose petals, trying to understand how one day could destroy so much and still somehow leave room for hope. When I finally returned to the pavilion, Adrien noticed immediately that something had shifted. Not dramatically, subtly, the way he always noticed. He crossed the dance floor toward me while an old Stevie Wonder song played through the speakers overhead. You okay? He asked softly. I nodded once. I talked to Brielle. That surprised him slightly. How'd that go? I considered the answer carefully. Complicated. Adrien smiled faintly. That feels accurate for today. I exhaled slowly. She didn't know about the money. He studied my face. You believe her? Yes. The answer came easier than I expected. Not because Brielle was innocent, but because I finally understood something important. There's a difference between being malicious and being emotionally conditioned by someone manipulative. My sister has spent years surviving our mother by staying aligned with her. I survived by overperforming. Different coping mechanisms, same damage. Adrien wrapped one arm gently around my waist. You don't have to figure everything out tonight. I leaned into him slightly. I know, and for once, I actually meant it. Because my whole life, emotional chaos always became my responsibility to solve immediately, fix the tension, smooth the conflict, restore the peace. But tonight, I was allowed to simply exist inside uncertainty. That realization felt strangely luxurious. The reception stretched warmly into the night after that. People danced, laughed, drank too much champagne. At one point, Hector Lawson somehow ended up leading a terrible but enthusiastic group rendition of Sweet Caroline near the bar. Maya nearly lost her voice screaming the chorus. Even I danced without overthinking for the first time in years, not carefully, not performatively, freely. And every time I looked toward Adrien, he was already looking back at me like he still couldn't believe I was real. Around midnight, the crowd finally began thinning. Older relatives left first, then families with children, then co-workers and distant acquaintances. The pavilion slowly emptied into warm summer darkness. Eventually, only close friends and immediate family remained. Adrien's mother hugged me tightly near the valet area before leaving. I know today was hard, Denise whispered gently against my hair. But none of what happened changes the fact that you belong with us now. Belong. Another dangerous word for someone like me. Because belonging had always felt conditional growing up. Useful daughters belonged. Obedient daughters belonged. But simply existing as myself, that had never seemed enough. I hugged her tighter without realizing it. Thank you. And I meant it with my entire chest. After the last guest finally disappeared and the music stopped, silence settled across the estate again. The staff moved quietly through the pavilion cleaning glasses and extinguishing candles. The emotional intensity of the day had faded into exhaustion now, bone-deep exhaustion. Adrian loosened his tie while we waited near the entrance for the shuttle to the hotel. "You still upright?" he asked. "Barely." He smiled. "Good, same." The shuttle ride downtown felt surreal. I kicked off my heels near the door with a groan. Adrian laughed softly. "There she is. My feet may actually be bleeding. You look terrifyingly elegant while suffering." "Thank you." I moved toward the large window overlooking downtown Knoxville and stared out at the glowing city lights below. The room was beautiful, modern, quiet, safe, and suddenly the emotional weight of the entire day crashed into me all at once. Not gracefully, violently. I bent forward slightly, covering my mouth as sobs hit my chest without warning. Adrian crossed the room instantly. No hesitation, no awkwardness. He just wrapped his arms around me tightly while I cried against him. Not delicate crying. Not cinematic crying. Real grief. Ugly, shaking, exhausted. Because surviving something emotionally brutal doesn't mean it hurt less. It just means you kept moving through it. "I'm sorry," I choked out finally. Adrian pulled back slightly. "For what?" "For today." Confusion crossed his face immediately. "Evelyn." "My family ruined our wedding." "No," he said gently but firmly. "Your family tried to ruin our wedding." That distinction mattered. More than I realized. Adrian brushed damp hair away from my face carefully. "And they failed." I laughed weakly through tears. "Barely." "No," he repeated softly. "They failed completely." I looked at him, really looked at him. At the calm steadiness still living behind his exhaustion. And suddenly I understood why my mother feared him so much, not because he was weak. Because he couldn't be manipulated through status. Nothing about him depended on external approval. That kind of person is impossible for controlling people to manage. Adrian sat beside me on the edge of the bed once my breathing finally steadied. Neither of us had changed clothes yet. His tie hung loose around his collar. My dress still smelled faintly like roses and perfume and stress. I studied him quietly for a long moment before noticing my phone charging on a nightstand. 27 missed calls, 34 text messages. My stomach tightened instantly. Most were from unknown numbers, others from extended relatives. A few from coworkers, one from Maya, "You alive?" Another immediately after. "Also, your wedding is definitely becoming family legend material." I laughed weakly despite myself. Then I saw the names I'd been avoiding. Dad, Brielle, Mom, multiple times. I stared at the screen for a long time without opening any messages. Adrian shifted beside me slightly, blinking awake slowly. The second he saw my face, he understood. "Messages?" I nodded once. "How bad?" "I haven't looked yet." He sat up carefully against the headboard beside me. "You don't have to today." There it was again. Permission, not pressure. Not expectations. Permission. I leaned my head briefly against his shoulder. My whole life, I admitted quietly, ignoring family conflict felt impossible. That's because they trained you to feel responsible for it. Simple, direct, true. I looked down at my phone again, then slowly turned it face down on the nightstand. "Not today." Adrian smiled softly. "Good." We ordered room service around 10, coffee, fruit, eggs neither of us ate much of. The emotional exhaustion still sat heavy in my body. Adrian noticed me staring absently out the window halfway through breakfast. You somewhere else? I hesitated. Then answered honestly. I keep replaying the ceremony. His expression softened immediately. The whole thing? No. I stared down at my coffee. The part where my dad looked at me after he realized. Adrian stayed quiet, giving me space to continue. He looked so lost, and that hurt in a completely different way than my mother's betrayal. Because my father has spent 30 years surviving conflict through avoidance. And yesterday, avoidance finally failed him publicly. Adrian reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Your mother manipulated him too. I know, but knowing didn't. Erased the complicated grief of watching my father realize he had become part of hurting me. After breakfast, we packed quietly for checkout. The normalcy of folding clothes and zipping bags felt surreal after everything that had happened. At one point, I caught sight of my wedding dress hanging near the window, soft ivory fabric glowing in morning light. And suddenly I remember standing at the altar gripping that navy envelope while my entire future balanced on whether I finally spoke the truth aloud. A strange calm settled over me then. Because despite the pain, I knew I would make the same choice again. Every single time. The drive back to our townhouse felt different than leaving for the wedding had. Lighter somehow. Not because everything was fixed. Because illusion had finally died. No more pretending my family dynamics were normal. No more minimizing emotional manipulation. No more shrinking myself to preserve peace. Truth had destroyed something. But it had also freed me. When Adrian pulled into our driveway just after noon, I felt another unexpected wave of emotion. Not my childhood home. Ours. The small brick townhouse with mismatched coffee mugs and unfinished bookshelves and half-painted guest room walls, safe. We carried bags inside quietly. The familiar scent of cedar candles and laundry detergent wrapped around me instantly. And for the first time all weekend, my nervous system relaxed completely. Adrian dropped the suit bag onto a chair near the kitchen. You want to shower first or emotionally dissociate on the couch for an hour? I stared at him. Then burst out laughing. That second one sounds incredible. Perfect. We spent most of the afternoon doing almost nothing. Which turned out to be exactly what we needed. We sat curled together beneath a blanket, watching terrible reality television while emotionally decompressioning in silence. At one point, Adrian fell asleep halfway through an episode with one hand still resting loosely against my knee. I watched him sleep for several minutes. Still stunned by the simple reality of him, the steadiness, the kindness, the emotional patience. My mother had spent years looking for ambition, status, pedigree, and somehow completely missed the rarest quality a person can possess, gentleness without weakness. Around 4:30, my phone buzzed again. This time I looked. Dad. Voicemail. I hesitated before pressing play. Static crackled softly for a second, then his voice. Evie? Hearing him call me that nearly undid me immediately. My father only used that nickname when I was little. I don't really know what to say. His voice sounded exhausted, older somehow. I should have asked more questions. A long pause followed. I trusted your mother because I always trusted your mother. Another pause. I'm sorry. Nothing dramatic. No excuses, no emotional speech, just remorse. Real remorse. The message ended quietly after that. I sat staring at the phone long after the recording finished. Adrian noticed immediately. Your dad? I nodded. What did he say? I swallowed hard. He apologized. Adrian stayed quiet for a moment. Then carefully asked, how do you feel about that? I thought honestly before answering. Sad, because apologies don't erase damage. Sometimes they simply confirm the damage was real. And that hurts too. That evening, Maya showed up unannounced carrying wine, takeout containers, and enough emotional chaos to fill the entire townhouse instantly. "I come bearing carbohydrates and judgment," she announced while kicking the door shut behind her. Adrian laughed from the kitchen. "Thank God Maya dumped bags of Thai food across our coffee table before collapsing dramatically onto the couch." "Okay," she said immediately. "I need updates," I groaned. "There are no updates. There are absolutely updates. Your wedding has become local folklore in under 24 hours. That got my attention immediately." "What?" Maya pulled out her phone. "Oh, babe. Someone uploaded part of the ceremony online." My stomach dropped. "What? Relax," she said quickly. "Not the whole thing. Just the part where you exposed the money transfers." Adrian looked alarmed too now. "How many views?" Maya grimaced. "A lot." I covered my face with both hands. "Oh my God. The comments are mostly on your side," she added carefully. "That somehow makes it worse." And honestly, it did, because suddenly the most painful moment of my life wasn't just family trauma anymore. It was public, searchable, discussed, consumed. Maya's expression softened slightly. "Hey." I looked up reluctantly. "You know why people are reacting so strongly?" I sighed. "Because my family's insane?" "Because you said out loud what most people spend their entire lives too afraid to say." That stopped me. Maya leaned back against the couch cushions carefully. "Do you know how many daughters are raised believing love has to be earned through obedience?" Silence settled softly across the room. "Too many, way too many." Maya pointed gently toward me. "And then you stood in front of 200 people and refused to accept that anymore." Emotion tightened painfully in my throat. Because I hadn't thought about it that way. To me, it felt personal, messy, specific, but maybe it wasn't only that. Maybe people recognized themselves inside it too. Adrian reached over and took my hand quietly, grounding me again, always grounding me. Maya raised her wine glass dramatically. "To emotional emancipation and catastrophic family systems." Adrian lifted his water glass. "I'll drink to that." I laughed despite myself and clinked my glass lightly against theirs. And somewhere beneath the exhaustion and grief and uncertainty, something new finally started growing. Not closure, not forgiveness, freedom. By Monday morning, Knoxville had fully absorbed the story. I realized that the second I walked into Brennan, Lawson and Pierce at 8:12 a.m., carrying my coffee and laptop bag. The receptionist, Denise, looked up from her desk with eyes wide enough to tell me everything before she even spoke. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I stopped walking." "You saw it." Denise pressed one hand dramatically against her chest. "The entire office saw it. Perfect. Absolutely perfect." I closed my eyes briefly. Behind me, the elevator doors opened again and two junior associates stepped into the lobby mid-conversation. They froze when they saw me. One of them mouthed, "That's her." Fantastic, just fantastic. I considered turning around and walking directly back out of the building. Instead, I inhaled slowly and forced myself toward the hallway. Professional, composed, alive despite everything. As I passed the copy room, conversations visibly stopped. Not maliciously, curiously, that somehow felt worse. By the time I reached my office, Maya was already inside sitting cross-legged in my desk chair eating a blueberry muffin. "You're famous," she announced. "I hate everyone." "That's fair." I dropped my bag onto the chair near the window and rubbed both hands over my face. "How bad is it?" Maya winced theatrically. "One clip hit 200,000 views." I stared at her. "In Knoxville?" "No, everywhere." I nearly choked on air. "What do you mean everywhere?" The algorithm has decided your emotional trauma is inspirational content. I sank slowly into the chair across from her. Oh my God, Maya's expression softened slightly. People really are on your side though. I don't want sides. I know. That was the problem. I never wanted public validation. I wanted a private life, a quiet wedding, a normal family, basic emotional safety. Instead, I got viral exposure and a mother who attempted marital sabotage with financial backing. Hector Lawson appeared in my doorway 20 minutes later. He leaned casually against the frame with a coffee cup in one hand. "Well," he said calmly, "that was certainly memorable." I groaned into my hands. "Please don't." Too late. Despite his dry tone, his expression carried genuine concern beneath it. "How are you holding up?" I thought about lying automatically, then stopped myself. Tired, reasonable. He stepped fully into the office and closed the door behind him. "The internet attention will die down faster than you think. That's not what worries me." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Your family," I nodded. Hector studied me carefully for a moment before speaking again. "You know something most people never learn, Evelyn?" "What?" "Truth changes systems permanently." I frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means once manipulation becomes visible, it loses most of its power." That settled heavily in my chest, because he was right. My mother's authority had depended on invisibility, private guilt, private pressure, private rewriting of reality. But now, 200 witnesses had watched the truth unfold publicly. Nothing could fully return to what it was before. Not for any of us. Hector straightened slightly near the door. "You don't need to rush forgiveness." I looked up at him. "Everyone keeps acting like I should eventually reconcile. That's because people confuse forgiveness with access." His tone stayed calm, measured. "But forgiveness without accountability becomes permission." That sentence lodged itself deep somewhere inside me immediately. Forgiveness without accountability becomes permission. Hector pointed lightly toward my desk. "Take your time." Then he left quietly without another word. I sat there staring at the closed office door for several long seconds afterward. Because for the first time in my life, someone older than me had validated boundaries without making me feel cruel for needing them. That realization almost hurt. Around lunchtime, my phone buzzed again. "Mom, not a call this time. A text. Please let me explain." I stared at the message while anxiety curled immediately through my stomach. Then another text arrived. "I never meant to hurt you." That one almost made me laugh bitterly. Intent and impact are not the same thing. A third message appeared before I could respond. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." There it was. Not, "I betrayed you." Not, "I crossed a line." Not, "I'm sorry." You humiliated me. Even now, her primary emotional reference point remained herself. My chest tightened painfully. Because some part of me had still hoped. Still hoped the exposure would create clarity, accountability, self-awareness. But shame and accountability are not the same thing either. Shame makes people protect themselves. Accountability requires people to confront themselves. I locked my phone and set it face down on the desk without replying. Maya looked up immediately from the visitor chair. "That's not professional." "I know." I buried my face briefly against his chest. Then admitted quietly, "She texted me." He leaned back slightly to study my face. "What did she say?" I exhaled slowly. "She's focused on being humiliated." Adrian closed his eyes briefly, not frustrated, not surprised. Just sad. That tracks. We ate dinner quietly that night. Not tense silence. Comfortable silence. The kind built from emotional safety instead of emotional avoidance. Halfway through the meal, Adrian looked up suddenly. "You know what I realized?" "What?" I've never once seen you angry at yourself this entire time. That surprised me. What do you mean? I mean, you've questioned your family. You've questioned the situation. But you haven't blamed yourself. I paused. Because he was right. And that was new. Historically, I blamed myself for everything. Conflict, distance, tension, disappointment. But this time? I didn't. Maybe because the betrayal had been too undeniable, too public, too extreme to rationalize away. Or maybe because somewhere between the aisle and the microphone, I finally stopped believing love requires self-erasure. Later that night, after dishes and showers and the slow, quiet routines of ordinary life, I found myself standing alone inside the unfinished guest room. Paint samples still covered one wall. A folded ladder sat near the closet. Maya, sitting across from me reviewing discovery files, immediately noticed my expression. She here? I nodded slowly. Maya leaned back in her chair. You want me to tell Denise you died? I almost smiled. Part of me wanted to say yes, but another part was tired of avoiding. 12 years, I murmured quietly. Maya frowned slightly. What? That's how long I spent protecting everyone else from uncomfortable conversations. I stood slowly from my desk. 5 minutes. Maya watched me carefully. You don't owe her forgiveness. I know. That answer came easier now, not painless. But true. When I stepped into the lobby, Brielle stood near the reception desk, twisting the strap of her purse nervously between both hands. She looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. There were dark circles beneath her eyes, and for once her makeup wasn't flawless. The second she saw me, her shoulders tightened visibly. Hey! Her voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. I stopped several feet away. Hi! Silence stretched awkwardly between us. Denise suddenly became very interested in organizing paper clips at the front desk. Brielle swallowed hard. I didn't know where else to go. That immediately irritated me. Not because it was manipulative, because it was honest. And honesty from Brielle always disarmed me more than manipulation ever did. I crossed my arms lightly. What do you want? Pain flickered across her face briefly at the sharpness in my tone. I wanted to explain. There's not much left to explain. I didn't know about the money. The words came. Fast. Urgent. I swear to God, Evie, I didn't know. I studied her carefully. Years ago, I would have immediately searched for ways to soften the conversation, to make her comfortable. Now I just watched, observed, and slowly, painfully, I realized something important. She was telling the truth. Not about everything, but about that. You still filmed it, I said quietly. Brielle flinched immediately. I know. You stood there recording while Mom tried to destroy my marriage. Tears filled her eyes almost instantly. I thought she was helping you. I stared at her. How? She kept saying Adrian was pulling you away from us, that you changed, that you were becoming cold and distant and independent. The word cut through her explanation sharply. Brielle stopped talking. Because we both heard it, the real issue, not distance. Not personality change, loss of control. I took a slow breath. Do you know what the worst part is? Brielle wiped quickly beneath her eyes. What? I spent years thinking you were the favorite, because Mom loved you more. Pain crossed her face immediately. Evie, but now I think she controlled both of us differently. That landed hard. I could see it. Because Brielle had been rewarded for compliance the same way I'd been rewarded for usefulness. Different roles. Same manipulation. Brielle stared down at the lobby floor. She's not doing well. I felt my body tense again immediately. There it is. Her head snapped upward. What? The guilt. That's not what I'm doing. It's always what she does. Someone confronts her. Suddenly she's devastated and fragile. and everyone has to comfort her instead. Brielle's eyes filled again. She cries every day. I laughed once quietly, sharp, humorless. You know what's incredible? She looked startled. The wedding was 3 weeks ago, and somehow I'm still the person expected to emotionally manage Mom. Brielle opened her mouth, then closed it, because she knew I was right. The silence between us stretched heavily. Finally, quietly, she said, "She misses you." That hurt, way more than anger would've, because despite everything, I missed parts of them too. Not the manipulation, not the control, but the ordinary things. Dad grilling in the backyard, Christmas mornings, shared family language. Losing toxic people still feels like loss when they were once home. I looked at my sister for a long moment before speaking again. Do you know what I needed that day? Brielle shook her head slightly. I needed one person in that family to stand up and say it was wrong before I had to defend myself publicly. Tears slipped down her face now silently. And none of you did. Her voice broke when she answered. I know. For the first time since the wedding, I believe someone in my family finally understood the damage. Not fully, not perfectly, but genuinely. I exhaled slowly. I'm not ready to fix this. Brielle nodded immediately. I know, but I don't hate you. That nearly broke her completely. She covered her mouth briefly, trying to steady herself. I'm sorry, she whispered. Not dramatic. Not performative, just devastated. And somehow that made it harder. Because genuine remorse leaves less to fight against. I glanced toward the office hallway behind me, then back at her. You should go, she nodded quickly. Okay, but before turning away, she hesitated. Dad asks about you constantly. Emotion tightened painfully in my throat again. I hated how complicated love remained even after betrayal. Brielle wiped beneath her eyes one last time, then quietly added, for what it's worth. She managed a weak, trembling smile. You looked really happy when you walked back down the aisle with him. And before I could answer, she turned and walked out of the building. I stood there staring through the glass doors long after she disappeared into the parking lot. Denise carefully approached from behind the reception desk. You okay? I laughed softly under my breath. I genuinely have no idea. That afternoon I couldn't focus on work at all. Every document blurred together. Every email felt meaningless compared to the emotional collision happening inside my chest. Because healing would have been easier if my family were monsters, pure villains. Easy to abandon. But dysfunctional families are rarely built from evil. They're built from fear, control, generational damage. Conditional love mistaken for protection. That complexity is what makes leaving so painful. When I got home that evening, Adrian immediately noticed something had changed. You saw someone. Adrian nodded once. Sometimes systems only become visible after they collapse. That sentence settled deep inside me immediately, because collapse changes perspective. Once the illusion breaks, you can't fully unsee it again. Adrian gently brushed hair away from my face. You don't have to decide everything right now. There it was again. Permission to move slowly. Permission to not rush emotional resolution just because other people felt uncomfortable with unfinished tension. I leaned into him tiredly. My whole life I thought being a good daughter meant absorbing pain quietly. Adrian's expression tightened slightly, and now I looked up at him. Now I think being healthy might disappoint people. A slow smile touched his face then. Probably, and strangely, for the first time in my life, that no longer felt unbearable. October arrived quietly. The air turned cooler across Knoxville. Leaves started gathering along sidewalks in soft copper drifts. Morning light came later, and for the first time in years, my life felt calm, not perfect, not fully healed, but calm. The townhouse slowly transformed alongside the season. Adrian finished repainting the guest room. I replaced the dining table centerpiece with small amber candles and eucalyptus branches. We settled into routines that felt almost sacred in their simplicity: coffee together before work, shared grocery runs on Sundays, falling asleep halfway through documentaries neither of us finished, tiny ordinary moments. The kind my mother never valued because they couldn't be displayed publicly. But I loved them, because peace has started feeling more luxurious than approval. One Thursday evening, Adrian stood at the kitchen island reviewing bridge schematics while I sorted through deposition notes nearby. Soft jazz played quietly through the speakers. Completely ordinary. And suddenly tears filled my eyes without warning. Adrian looked up immediately. What happened? I laughed softly at myself while wiping quickly beneath one eye. Nothing. He frowned slightly. That's usually not a good sign. I shook my head. No, I mean literally nothing happened. He waited, patient as always. I looked around the kitchen slowly, the warm overhead lights, half-folded laundry on the couch, his reading glasses abandoned beside a coffee mug. I just realized this is the first time in my life home hasn't felt emotionally dangerous. The room went very still. Adrian's expression softened instantly. He crossed the kitchen without another word and wrapped his arms around me tightly. And standing there against his chest, I realized something devastating. I had spent 33 years surviving tension so consistently that peace itself felt unfamiliar. No wonder I had tolerated so much. Chaos had always felt normal. 2 weeks later, my father called again. This time, I answered immediately. "Hi, Dad." Silence crackled softly through the line for a second. Then, "Hi, sweetheart." His voice sounded cautious, careful, like someone approaching injured wildlife. We talked about ordinary things again at first: weather, work, football, safe territory. Then eventually, quietly he asked, "How's Adrian?" It was the first time he said my husband's name since the wedding. Something inside my chest tightened painfully. "He's good. That's good." A pause followed, then another. Finally my father exhaled slowly. "I owe him an apology too." Emotion climbed sharply into my throat, because unlike my mother, my father wasn't defending himself anymore. He was confronting himself. "I think he'd appreciate hearing that someday," I said carefully. Dad went quiet again. Then softly, "I spent a lot of years taking the easy path." I closed my eyes. Because that sentence explained almost my entire childhood: avoidance, silence, compliance disguised as peacekeeping. "I know." Another long pause. Then, "Your mother still thinks you'll eventually come around." That immediately complicated something inside me. "How is she?" Dad hesitated too long. "Dad, she's embarrassed, not devastated, not remorseful, embarrassed." I stared out the kitchen window at leaves blowing across the backyard fence. "That's not the same thing as sorry." "No," he admitted quietly. "It's not." And somehow hearing him acknowledge that mattered deeply, because for the first time, my father wasn't minimizing reality to protect her. We spoke for another 10 minutes before ending the call awkwardly but gently. Afterward, I sat quietly at the kitchen table staring at my phone. Adrian appeared moments later carrying 2 mugs of tea. "How'd it go?" I accepted the mug slowly. "Different. Good different," I considered carefully. "Honest different." Adrian nodded once. That matters more. He was right. Honesty changes the emotional temperature of everything, even painful conversations. By November, the viral attention surrounding the wedding finally started fading. Thank God, the internet had moved on to newer disasters: a politician's scandal, a celebrity divorce, some influencer caught faking charity work. Public attention is brutally temporary. I was grateful for that. Still, occasionally strangers recognized me. Once at Target. Once at a coffee shop downtown. One woman near the frozen foods aisle stopped me nervously and said, "I just wanted to thank you." I blinked at her. For what? Her eyes filled unexpectedly with tears. For saying no publicly, emotion punched through me instantly. Because suddenly I understood something larger than myself again. People weren't reacting to the spectacle. They were reacting to recognition. To the unbearable familiarity of conditional love. The woman smiled shakily. My mother controlled everything too. I didn't know what to say, so I simply squeezed her hand once gently. Sometimes understanding is enough. That night, I told Adrian about the interaction while we cooked dinner together. He listened quietly while chopping vegetables beside me. You changed something for people, he said softly after I finished. I didn't mean to. I know. That was the thing. I never wanted to become symbolic. I just wanted to survive. But maybe survival becomes visible to others sometimes. Maybe honesty gives other people permission too. Near Thanksgiving, Brielle texted again. No pressure this time. Just Dad's making too much pie and pretending it's accidental. I stared at the message for a long time, then unexpectedly laughed. Because that sounded exactly like him. 5 minutes later, another text appeared. Mom's not coming to dinner. She says she's not ready. My chest tightened immediately. Not ready. Interesting wording. Not angry, not furious. Not ready. Something inside the family structure was shifting now. Slowly, painfully, but shifting. Adrian found me staring at my phone near the living room window. What's up? I handed him the screen silently. He read the messages carefully, then looked at me. What do you want to do? There it was again. Not. What should you do? Not. What's the right thing? What do you want? Such a small distinction. Such a revolutionary one for someone raised like me. I thought about Thanksgiving at my parents' house. Dad awkwardly overcooking turkey, Brielle pretending not to cry. An empty seat where my mother would normally orchestrate everything. The image hurt, but not in the same sharp way anymore, more like bruising. I think, I started slowly. Adrian waited quietly. I think I might be ready to see my dad. He nodded gently. Okay. I looked down at my phone again, still uncertain. Still afraid. But no longer trapped inside fear. And maybe that was the real difference now, not that pain disappeared. That it no longer controlled every decision I made. I typed carefully before I could overthink it. I'll come by for dessert. Not the whole day. Not full reconciliation. A beginning, small, measured, mine. Brielle responded almost instantly. Dad just started crying in the kitchen. I closed my eyes briefly. Emotion rose warm and painful through my chest again. Adrian stepped closer quietly. You okay? I nodded slowly. Yeah, and for the first time in a very long time, I actually believed it. Thanksgiving arrived cold and gray. The kind of Tennessee morning where the sky hangs low over the hills, and every tree looks stripped bare by memory. I stood in our bedroom staring at my reflection while fastening small gold earrings with slightly trembling hands. Not because I was afraid of seeing my family again. Because I wasn't sure who we were anymore. Adrian stood near the closet adjusting the sleeves of his sweater. You don't have to stay long, he reminded me gently. I know. And if it gets weird, we leave. I smiled faintly. You say that like it might not immediately get weird. That's fair. He crossed the room toward me slowly. You ready? I looked at him honestly. No. Good, he said softly. That's probably the correct emotional response. I laughed quietly despite myself. Then he kissed my forehead once and took my hand. The drive to my childhood home felt surreal, same roads. Same intersections. Same grocery store where my mother used to criticize everything I put in a cart. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. The closer we got, the tighter my chest became. By the time Adrian parked outside the split-level house where I grew up, my pulse was hammering visibly beneath my skin. The rusted swing set still stood crooked in the backyard. Dad still hadn't taken it down. Somehow that nearly made me cry. Adrian noticed immediately. "You okay?" I nodded too quickly. "No, honest again. That was becoming a habit now." The front door opened before we even reached the porch. Dad, for a second, neither of us moved. Because 6 months suddenly collapsed into one unbearable moment. He looked older, not dramatically, just heavier somehow, like guilt had weight. Then his eyes landed on me fully and filled immediately. "Hi, sweetheart," my throat closed instantly. "Hi, Dad." He stepped forward awkwardly like he wasn't sure whether he was allowed to hug me, so I closed the distance first. The second his arms wrapped around me, he broke. Not loudly, quietly, a shaking inhale against my shoulder. "I'm sorry," he whispered immediately. "I'm so sorry." Emotion detonated through my chest so fast it almost hurt physically. Because my father never apologized growing up. He avoided, deflected, stayed silent. But this? This was real. I hugged him tighter. "I know." Behind me, Adrian quietly stepped inside carrying the pie we brought. Dad quickly wiped at his eyes and straightened awkwardly. "Adrian." My husband extended his hand immediately. But Dad ignored it and pulled him into a hug instead. And that nearly undid me all over again. "I owe you an apology too," Dad said roughly. "You didn't deserve any of that." Adrian glanced briefly toward me before answering. "Thank you." Simple, graceful, enough. The house smelled exactly the same. Turkey, brown sugar, coffee, old wood floors. Memory hit me in waves the second I stepped fully inside. Thanksgivings where Mom corrected how I mashed potatoes. Christmas mornings assembling Brielle's gifts while mine stayed wrapped beneath the tree. Years spent performing usefulness to earn affection. And yet, there were good memories too. That was the hardest part. Trauma rarely erases love completely. It tangles itself inside it. Brielle appeared from the kitchen holding a casserole dish. The second she saw me, her entire face crumpled emotionally. "Oh my God." She set the dish down so fast it nearly slid off the counter before hugging me tightly. "I'm really happy you came." I almost didn't. I know. Her honesty surprised me again. No pretending, no emotional theater, just truth. The dining room looked strange without Mom directing everything. No hyper-controlled centerpiece. No obsessive place card arrangement. No commentary about presentation. The silence where her energy usually existed felt enormous. Dad noticed me looking around. She didn't want to come. I swallowed slowly. "Okay," she said she needed more time. Adrian quietly squeezed my hand beneath the table. Grounding me again. Always grounding me. Dinner itself felt awkward at first. 3 people relearning each other after emotional demolition. Conversation stumbled unevenly between safe topics: football, weather, Dad's tomatoes. At one point, Brielle laughed too loudly at something Adrian said, and we all visibly recognized the nervousness beneath it. But slowly, something softened. Not fixed. Softened. Dad asked Adrian about his bridge project. Brielle asked about my promotion. I helped clear dishes without automatically feeling obligated to manage everyone emotionally. And somewhere between pie and coffee, I realized something quietly devastating. This was the first family gathering of my life not controlled by fear of my mother's reactions. The absence sat at the table with us like another person. After dessert, Dad disappeared upstairs for a few minutes before returning holding a small cardboard box. I found some old things while cleaning the attic. He set the box carefully in front of me. Inside were photographs, school plays, Christmas mornings, family vacations. Versions of us before everything became so emotionally complicated. I flipped through them slowly while silence settled softly around the table. Then I stopped. One photo. Me at maybe 8 years old sitting beside Mom on the porch steps. I was smiling directly at the camera, but Mom was looking at me. Not critically, not impatiently, tenderly. My chest tightened painfully, because there it was. Proof she had loved me. Maybe imperfectly, maybe fearfully, but genuinely. And somehow that hurt almost more than hatred would've. Brielle noticed the photograph in my hand. She used to brag about you constantly when you weren't around. I looked up sharply. What? She talked about you like you hung the moon. Emotion climbed hard into my throat. That's not how it felt. I know. Brielle's eyes filled again. She struggled for words. Mom only understands love through control. Silence followed that, heavy, painfully accurate. Dad stared down into his coffee cup quietly. Finally he spoke. She grew up scared all the time. We both looked at him. He sighed heavily. Her father controlled everything, money, clothes, friends, every decision. Something inside me shifted quietly. Not excuse, context. There's a difference. Dad rubbed tiredly at his forehead. Your mother spent her whole life believing control was the only thing standing between safety and disaster. I stared down at the childhood photo again. Suddenly I could see it. Generational fear moving through women like inheritance, control disguised as protection, possession disguised as love. And somewhere along the line, my mother stopped seeing me as a daughter and started seeing me as something she had to manage to feel safe herself. Tears blurred my vision suddenly. Not forgiveness, grief. Grief for what we might have been without all that fear. A soft knock interrupted the silence. 3 quiet taps against the front door. Every person at the table froze instantly. My heart stopped, because somehow, before anyone moved, I knew. Dad stood slowly. No one spoke as he walked toward the entryway. The sound of the door opening echoed faintly through the house. Silence, then my father's quiet voice. Lorraine. My stomach twisted violently. Brielle stared at me wide-eyed across the table. Adrian's hand found mine instantly beneath it. And then, slow footsteps. My mother appeared in the dining room doorway wearing a dark wool coat with both hands clasped tightly in front of her. For the first time in my entire life, she looked unsure of herself, not angry, not composed, not commanding, just scared. Her eyes found mine immediately and filled with tears. No one spoke. The silence stretched so long it almost became unbearable. Then finally, quietly, my mother said the words I never truly believed I would hear. I was wrong. The room went completely still, because those 4 words had probably cost Lorraine Mercer more pride than anything in her entire life. Her voice trembled slightly. I thought if I controlled everything tightly enough, nobody I loved would get hurt. Tears slipped down her face now silently. But I hurt you anyway. Emotion slammed into my chest so hard I physically couldn't speak. My mother looked smaller somehow standing there. Not physically, emotionally. Like certainty had finally collapsed inside her. She swallowed hard. I loved you so much that I confused loving you with managing you. A broken sound escaped Brielle beside me. Dad looked down at the floor immediately. And suddenly I realized something profound. This was probably the first emotionally honest moment our family had ever had. No manipulation, no performance. No guilt, just truth, painful raw truth. My mother looked at Adrian then. I owe you an apology too. Adrian nodded quietly. You hurt someone good because you were afraid of losing control. She closed her eyes briefly. Yes, no defensiveness, no excuses, just accountability. And somehow that mattered more than any dramatic apology ever could. I stood slowly from the table. My entire body felt shaky. Mom watched me carefully like she expected rejection. Maybe she deserved it. Maybe part of me still wanted to give it. But another part was exhausted by generations of emotional war. I walked toward her slowly until we stood only a few feet apart. You humiliated me, I said quietly. Tears slid down her face immediately. I know. You tried to turn my wedding into a transaction. I know. You made me feel like love had to be earned my entire life. That one visibly shattered her, because it was true, and finally, she knew I knew it. My voice cracked slightly now too. I needed a mother, Mom. Not a manager. She covered her mouth with one trembling hand, and for the first time in my life, my mother looked heartbroken by my pain instead of defensive about hers. I'm sorry, she whispered, not polished, not performative, real. I stared at her for a very long moment. Then finally said the truest thing I had learned all year. I forgive you. She broke completely. A sob escaped her so suddenly Dad moved instinctively toward her. But I lifted one hand gently. Not yet. Because forgiveness and repair are not the same thing. I looked directly at my mother. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. She nodded immediately through tears. I know. And things can't go back to how they were. Another nod, more tears. I know, that mattered too. Because healing only begins once reality is accepted fully. I exhaled shakily. Then, after 33 complicated years, I hugged my mother. Not because everything was fixed. Not because the damage disappeared. But because for the first time in our lives, neither of us was pretending anymore, and strangely, that truth felt more healing than perfection ever could. Later that night, Adrian and I drove home beneath a cold Tennessee sky streaked with stars. I sat quietly watching lights blur past the car window while his hand rested warm against my knee. How do you feel? He asked softly. I thought about it carefully, the wedding, the betrayal, the confrontation, the silence afterward, tonight. Then finally answered honestly, free. He smiled slightly. I leaned my head against the seat, looking out into the dark hills beyond the highway. My mother once believed love meant controlling every outcome. I spent most of my life believing love meant sacrificing myself to keep other people comfortable. But standing at that altar changed something. Because love was never supposed to feel like obedience. Real love trusts. Real love listens. Real love leaves room for truth. And maybe families don't break in one moment. Maybe they fracture slowly through silence and fear and all the things nobody says out loud. But maybe healing works the same way too. One honest conversation, one boundary, one choice at a time. That's my story. One wedding, one microphone. One moment where I finally stopped letting other people decide what my life was worth. And the strangest part? Losing control of the narrative turned out to be the first real freedom any of us ever had.